quick hello to everyone. We've got a crowded agenda today, so we're going to start. And I've just seen my contributors are all here, so that's a lovely start. Thank you all for joining us. This is obviously a very exciting session for us to convene as NatureFinance. I'm going to come back in a minute and explain how this session's going to work. But in the first instance, I would like to invite Dr. Simon Zadek, who's the co-CEO of NatureFinance, to explain a little bit about how we've been positioning this work for NatureFinance.
It's like giving a Nobel Prize before anything happens, right? But thanks very much, Isobel. So let me add my welcome. My name's Simon Zadek. I'm the co-CEO of NatureFinance. It's great to see you here. And I just wanted to offer maybe just a couple of thoughts to kind of pepper in to what I think will be an absolutely not just fascinating but important discussion today, not just for us as a whole, but for each of us individually. For anyone who gets out of bed, you'll know that the 1.5 target is done. And we can debate it in all kinds of different, interesting, stimulating, scientific, technical, quantitative ways, but we're past that conversation. The really interesting and important issue now becomes, so what? What does that mean? Where do we go next? And of course, the inclination is to go, we've just got to try harder. Whatever we were doing before, get up earlier, go to bed later, make more phone calls in whatever particular role we have. And that's got to be part of the answer. But it's almost certainly not the whole answer. That as the narrative shifts and expectations shift, not just amongst, if I might say it, the global elite, but amongst the wider communities around the world, all sorts of complicated things are likely to happen. In fact, are already happening. That left to their own devices, as it becomes transparent that we are no longer in control of the process of climate change, not surprisingly, we will see growing xenophobia, populism, inward-looking, more walls being built, more of the bad side of many people emerging at a collective level. And perhaps as individuals, we'll think, I wonder how I'm going to protect my family in this world. So it's not just a bad thing, it's an understandable thing. And so it's incumbent upon us, perhaps, as a community of diverse actors to think about not we should get up earlier and go to bed later, but maybe there are some different things that we should do. When I was in discussion on this topic with Nick Stern at COP28 in the wonderful arena of Dubai, he made two observations. One, as we shift expectations, will the narrative be co-opted by actors that perhaps have narrower interests in mind? So there's a story there to think about. And he said, as we begin to understand that we're moving into a far more disrupted future than we had hoped for and envisaged, are there a whole bunch of investments, and I don't mean commercial investments necessarily, but more broadly investments that are, in the language, maladaptations, that we're investing in things that aren't going to work? And similarly, have we, despite our ambitions since Paris, got sort of locked into a sort of win-win view of the world? It's all going to be fine. It's all going to look like this tent just without the carbon. Our tables are going to look the same just without the carbon. That we've somehow got into a sort of view of change where nobody gets hurt. And of course, we already know that that's absurd. And yet many of the initiatives that we may be part of maybe just playing into that win-win in a way that restricts us from thinking out of the box. You know, we have 130 central banks and financial regulators looking at climate and nature, but they're looking at it through a financial stability lens, despite the fact that they govern our global financial system. They're not required to ask, what role do we really have in mitigating climate change by ensuring that those that we license to operate in global financial markets can do certain things and frankly just can't do other things. That's a level beyond which convention sits today. And we have to think about whether we need to jump the track slightly of some of the things that we're doing and begin to consider far more uncomfortable plays that our institutions, our cultures, our religions, our countries are not keen on at all. What might they be? Well, that's what we're here to talk about. So the Beyond 1.5 agenda obviously is a shorthand because anyone who knows anything about this topic knows that every fraction of a degree counts and counts differently in every place. So excuse the vulgarization. Of course, we're trying to provide a directional conversation, not a scientific observation in the title. So I hope we won't get stuck on that language. But I do think we all start with a commitment, huge expertise, masses of experience and energy, and probably almost no clue as to what to do next. And I would encourage us to think about this conversation just as the first of many that we need to have in trying to fill that gap as we move forward. And I'm super appreciative that you've taken time out on the first day of WEF to come and join us in this light-hearted chat. Thank you very much indeed.
So one of the perils of letting Simon go first is that he has a tendency to steal all your lines. So starting with a blanker slate, my role here is to help moderate and support our contributors to offer their perspectives on planning for Beyond 1.5. Beyond that, that's a sort of glorified timekeeping role. But I've been set a task, which is a design question task, which is how do we support this as part of a conversation that arises out of the conversations that NatureFinance initiated at COP28? How do we support this conversation to go forward so that rather than dwelling in the inertia, the despondency, the fragmentation, the dysfunction, or indeed enabling those things and enabling actors to step into that space and co-opt the narrative for fragmentation and dysfunction, that we play a role that means that each and every one of you, hopefully, leaves this session with something that you can think about that you take forwards in your own life or a different way of looking at your body of work. So as Simon suggested, one of the things that changes in a world warming beyond 1.5 is the gap between our professional endeavors and our personal lives shrinks. We have to make moral choices. Marie-Laure shared with me the front page of something this morning, which was the business of business is business, which is a beautifully circular and illogical position. So the business of business is humanity, right? So my task here is to work out how do we deliver the business of business is humanity. And I now see, so in the definition of putting Andre on the spot, I would like to invite a few reflections from Andre Hoffman. So Andre, you've engaged so deeply and worked so closely with so many of the people in the sectors represented here today and in the SDG tent and the intent programming this week. Do you think that we are at an inflection point about thinking about how we plan for the future?
Well, thank you very much, Isobel. Yes, it's a bit difficult for me because I don't have the wisdom of the remarks that Simon just made, and I will try to do this without a safety net. I'm terribly sorry to be late. We were caught in this madness that Davos has become, or is, or was, I don't really know, one of these. Yes, we are at a point of inflection, and I think Isobel is absolutely right. We are getting at a point where things are accelerating at a really high rate. We've all heard about the statistics of the WWF Living Planet Index of the 60% loss of biodiversity in the last 60 years. It's one of the statistics I remember because 60-60 is easy. It's terrifying. And as we know, most of the conversation is focused on climate, whereby climate you can measure by looking at CO2 emissions. And if you do something right, maybe on one single issue you can make a difference. But it's much more complex than that. It's much more, it depends on nature. Nature is the key of what we should be doing, because every time we lose a bit of nature, we cannot find it again. Extinction is forever, and I think that's an important concept to work with. I'm just as Simon is indignant about this incredible focus on 1.5 degrees. We've been told 1.5 degrees is the dangerous quote. We need to absolutely make sure we don't get there. And as a result, we're constantly on the back foot when we should be taking real proper action. The international climate, no, what is it called? The Office Mondial de la Météo, what is it called? The international, exactly. I just told us that we have reached last year 1.47 in 1 year, 1.47 compared to 2016. If you compare that to the next 20 years, there's no way we're going to get to 1.5 by 2030. It's even absolutely. It's a lie, and lies have to be fought. And I think one of the purpose of this gathering today is how can we now react to the reality that 1.5 is no longer the appropriate target, and how do we react to the urgency of making sure that we put nature into the whole climate conversation. So, is that enough, or shall I? A bit more. So Simon, who as you know is my master in these things, has been able to sort of, over the years, made completely evident to all of us that what we really need to do if we want nature to play a role into the way we organize society is to put a financial value to nature. We lose nature, no, sorry, the opposite. We use nature because it's for free, and it's only when we lost it that we realize it's priceless. Now, priceless and free is the same thing, as we all know. So how can we collectively, together, put together a new model in place which will allow us not only to limit to 1.5 to 2 degrees the growth of temperature on the planet, but also to take the real actions that we should be taking collectively to make the planetary boundary something more sustainable in the long term. Thank you very much, and now back to Isobel.
So it's possible the pattern's going to continue and everyone's just going to steal my lines before I have a chance to say them. But this is great. So move to reflect on Andre's point about we have at the moment, a very limited perspective on what living within planetary boundaries is and what it looks like. And we don't yet include the complexity of nature. I'd like to come to Marco Lambertini. Marco, you have been a champion and change maker for nature in a number of organizations, and most currently for the Nature Positive Initiative. And the Global Biodiversity Framework, which was signed in November 2022, was hailed as the Paris Agreement for Nature. It's key to its success is aligning the global financial flows with nature positive outcomes. So I would ask you, how might the nature community, and there are others representative in the nature community, how might the nature community support businesses, governments, the finance sector to align those flows and outcomes in a world warmed beyond 1.5 degrees?
2 minutes?
3.
3 minutes, great. So first of all, thank you so much. And I have to say, after these disruptive interventions from Simon, as usual, constructively disruptive, and Andre, it's a bit difficult to answer such a specific question, but let me just first start with one reflection. As soon as I saw the title of this event, something came to mind, which goes back to a say that my grandmother was telling me when I was trying to hide from something. And she was telling me, Marco, non ti puoi nascondere dietro un dito. This is the Italian version. You can't hide behind the finger. I can see you. And I think this is the situation we are facing with the 1.5. We know, honestly, that we can reach that target. But also, this is the question I get all the time when I meet young people. The question I get all the time is, Marco, are you optimistic we can stay below 1.5? And actually, I think, I'm not telling them this is the wrong question, but it's the wrong framing of the question. It's not a question of 1.5 only target that we can give ourselves. It's about doing what we can to reduce and mitigate climate. Because 1.7 is better than 2, and 2 is better than 2.1. And we know that if we don't put all our energy, all our efforts, in frankly what we know are the solutions, the consequences will be absolutely catastrophic. We know that. That's the only certainty we have. And so when it comes down to 1.5 and how to get closer to it at least, is the two solutions that we all know, reducing emission on one end, preserving the natural sinks and natural storages on the other. This is what we have to do. And when we are closing to understanding that actually we are failing on a target, there is a tendency and a temptation, very seductive, to spasmodically look for something new. Now, I'm saying, and this is my challenge for the discussion, of course, innovation is, super important. We should never stop looking for alternative approaches. But also we should look in what we already know can work if we simply do it at scale. And nature, for me, captures that category. Nature is something that, since you mentioned Stern, Simon, the economics of climate change in 2005, 2006, I think, the Stern review already was telling us that the most cost-effective way to mitigate climate change was to invest in nature mitigation, in the ability of nature, in preserving and enhancing the ability of nature to mitigate climate change. Have we done that? No. And now the GBF, come to your question finally, and in the last 30 seconds, the GBF, the Global Biodiversity Framework, is a framework that for the first time, first of all, is the most ambitious, holistic, and measurable plan for nature we ever had, the world ever agreed to. But secondly, it has, apart from a number of very disruptive targets like 30% protection, 30% restoration, 200 billion per year on NatureFinance, $500 billion redirection of subsidies harmful to nature, on top of all that has a mission. And the mission sets, for the first time ever, the global goal for nature, halt and reverse nature loss by 2030. This is the first time that we have a measurable goal for nature that we need to and we can rally around it. This is disruptive, like Paris Agreement, the below 2 degrees, now 1.5, was disruptive for the energy sector, paving the way to the renewable energy revolution and the rise. Now this halt and reverse, so not just net zero, this is net positive, this is net nature positive, it's not carbon neutral, nature positive. Halt and reverse is the opportunity to disrupt the other sectors. Agriculture, fishing, forestry, extractives, infrastructures that today are the source of footprint and nature loss. So I would look at this challenge of the 1.5 from a nature perspective as a way to look at what we know we need to do it at scale, and do it at scale much faster than ever before, instead of necessarily spasmodically try to find the holy grail somewhere else. Because nature has the solutions, we just need to help her provide them. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. So just a few thoughts following from that. We have the idea that there is no silver bullet, which I'm going to pick up in a second. We have, just as a design challenge, I'm sure there are some of you in the room now who have the opportunity to think about how we might deploy nature in innovative ways that we haven't previously thought to deploy nature, both as a mitigation strategy, but also as a deep adaptation strategy. I had a third thought, but it's gone to me. Oh, and maybe that there's a piece which is not around spasmodically changing the targets, but about finding ways to be disruptive within the architecture that means that we can deliver those targets at scale. So I'm going to use this architectural framing to come to Marie-Laure Schaufelberger. Marie-Laure, you are head of ESG and stewardship at Pictet Group, but you are also, you're about to get a microphone coming from you, from Alexandre. But you're also the president of Sustainable Finance Geneva. Pictet Group recognizes a fiduciary responsibility to accelerate the global transition in line with the climate science. So in the light of the climate science and the positioning that we're talking about today, but also thinking about disruptions that we have seen in the finance sector, so the 2008 financial crisis, the response to the global pandemic. What are the hot wires that we can use in the finance ecosystem that would rapidly accelerate investment away from carbon-intensive assets, nature-degrading assets, and which of them remain useful in a world warmed beyond current political commitments?
Thanks a lot, and happy to be with all of you. Just a couple of thoughts on this, and we heard it already, right? No silver bullet. There's not going to be one magical solution, technological mindset shift. It's going to come from a plethora and a multitude of different solutions and testing and learning, and the ability to pivot. So not thinking for permanence, but thinking for agility when we come up with some solutions. And having the courage also to look facts in the face when something is not working. And having a real conversation around what's not working. What I'd also like to remind ourselves of is that 1.5 degrees is not a lofty target. It's a safe operating boundary, right? It's a limit. Beyond which we go into the unknown. And as we heard from André, the WMO told us this last year, the unknown is here. And so maybe taking a step back, as a financial institution, when we started looking at this topic, right, the first thing we did is tried to come up with what our convictions were when it came to climate change, and specifically potentially runaway climate change, right, beyond 1.5. And we came up with 3 key takeaways. The first one is that this, obviously, as you know, is a systematic risk, so it cannot be hedged or diversified away. As a global investor, all of us, and all of our pension funds as well, are exposed to this systemic risk. The second piece is, therefore, this will be evident in the price of assets. The challenge we have today with the question of the price of assets is the price is not right. Climate change, nature loss, and we'll get to social, probably we're getting there, and we're going to talk about more and more of these issues because social foundations are key to realizing our environmental targets. All of this is based on a gigantic market failure because we have subsidies that are maladaptive, to the point that Simon made, right? We give, over the last 10 years, the US gave $35 billion to the meat and dairy industry, $33 million to the alternatives and plant-based industry. 33 million, 35 billion. What does that do in terms of the companies that are capturing those subsidies, and what signal that sends to financial institutions? We're playing in a field where the price is not right, and we need that price to be right. So we need political actors to take responsibility and to look at what they can do in terms of financial mechanisms to ensure that we're subsidizing the things that we need in terms of the outcomes we want, be it trying to maintain a 1.5 at some point in the future by 2100. Let's also remember the scale of time that we're playing with here. But also in terms of our agriculture, right? So we need to look beyond just the carbon question. And we heard Marco also mention it. And the third piece, beyond the price of assets, is we can engage for change. We have a responsibility as stewards of capital to not just sit there, ride the wave, and try to manage the uncertainty better than others do, but to actually influence change, to engage with the companies in which we invest, to identify those that have transition pathways beyond just your boilerplate, yeah, we have a net zero plan. Okay, but what does that mean exactly? Are you looking at CO2, greenhouse gases globally? Are you looking at nature? Or what are you thinking about just transition? Has it become a just wait transition? So looking at how we steward capital and how we engage and what messages we send out. Because as investors, that's absolutely critical. We are at the center of a lot of these major companies that are also influencing the society in which we live. So those 3 points, we can't hide from this. And this is here. It's not in 10 years or 15 years. It will have an impact, and therefore we have to work on the price mechanisms, both on the public and private side. And we can also do a lot to ensure that the companies in which we invest are not massively directing capital to activities like lobbying, to keep existing subsidies in place, like our famous 35 billion versus 33 million. And we have to all take our responsibilities because we all have a role to play. Part of the finger pointing is very comfortable. It's his fault, it's her fault, it's that industry's fault. We are all in this together. We are citizens. We are part of corporates. We are part of governments. We vote. And so now it is the time for implementation. It is time for the responsibility, and it is time to look facts in the face. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marie-Laure. So we talked a little bit earlier, Marie-Laure, and we talked about value capture and at what point, and also in what time horizon. So perhaps one of the things that I might provoke over table discussions is, as Simon said, there will be winners and losers if we allow this to slide. And the winners and losers will position themselves at different points in the value capture and at different points in the time horizon. So how do we short circuit that in order to ensure, and we'll come back to this later with one of our other speakers, but to ensure that the poorest are not swept off, literally swept off the face of the earth. We had an interesting discussion in the context of private finance with Marie-Laure about the mandate that's given to you by your investors and the level to which the investor can be activist. This is in private finance as a perspective, so I'd like now to move to public finance. Mafalda Duarte is the executive director for Green Climate Fund. Mafalda Green Climate Fund is the largest global climate fund with a mandate for accelerating transformative climate action for developing countries. Could you share a little of how you think that the fund's approach might have to change as it becomes increasingly apparent that we're moving towards a far more disrupted future than we had hoped or planned for?
Thank you very much. Let me stand here and maybe move towards this side so that I'm not giving my back to anybody. And thank you very much, Simon, for inviting me and as a representative of the Green Climate Fund. And I'm here really because, above all, I'm interested in getting to know many of you and hearing about your ideas and what you think that the Green Climate Fund should be doing to advance this agenda. It's quite an important point in time for the fund. We have a new strategy that was approved last year. We just finished a capital raising, or what we call in our jargon replenishment. So we mobilized another $13 billion, which we will be deploying in the next 4 years. One of our key targets for the next 4 years, we have many as part of our strategy, but one of them is to invest in such a way that we help restore, conserve, or manage natural capital in a sustainable way in the order of 120 to 190 million hectares. So that's quite a target. And having been investing for many years in climate change or climate relevant investments in developing countries, I do think that, and I have seen it for many years, we have been doing quite valuable investments. I see Naoko here also when she was leading the Global Environment Facility. I'm sure she will join me in this understanding. We have been investing for several years in very valuable investments and generating important outcomes, and really we have piloted solutions, we have tested solutions. So speaking to Marco and saying we already know many things that work, we just need to scale them up, it's true. But still, knowing them, and we have known them for some time, and we don't see it happening. So what is it that we need to do differently? Why is it that we are not scaling up the solutions, or we are not scaling up to the extent that we need in a sufficiently fast-paced way, the solutions we know that work. So we really need to think disruptively. What is it that we are not doing? What is it that we need to do differently? And I see other colleagues here. I see Kirsten here and Sandrine, and we've over the years, I think last 2 or 3 years, we've been having these conversations around, a lot of the things that we do are just incremental. Just 1 more good projects, 2 more good projects, 3 more good projects, which deliver valuable results and impacts. But how do we change the systems? We have food systems that don't serve us at all. They don't serve us from an environmental point of view. They don't serve us from a health point of view. They just don't serve us. But how do we fight, how do we fight the interests and the influence that is driving decisions that we know don't serve us, not even from a health perspective. Let alone from a climate perspective, but they don't serve us from a health perspective. If there's one thing that everybody cares about is their own health and their loved ones. So I'm here. I do think we need to think about disruption and think about how do we do things. We really need a big shift here. The approaches that we've been taking are incremental, are just not serving us. So I look forward to engaging with many of you here after this, because at least as far as my responsibility is concerned right now, I take it very seriously. We have a lot of resources that can be deployed in a very impactful way to serve the objectives that we all aspire and we share in this room. But I also have the clear conviction that it cannot be the way we have been doing it. Not because it was not valuable, but because it's not going to deliver at the scale, at the time that is needed. Thank you.
Mafalda, can I just pick up 2 points with you while you're up? So you've, in this kind of incrementalist move, you've positioned food systems and health as 2 of the places where we would need a shift. So in an ideal world, when we didn't know how strongly structured the global food systems were, and we didn't, we hadn't seen lots of efforts at activism fail to undo those systems, what might be one of the ways that we could start to break apart that kind of solidarity / monopoly? And in health, are we missing a piece of information that links human health and well-being, or are we missing a set of information that links human health and well-being to something that's actionable by the finance sector?
Interestingly, in my view, and this is one thing that I have been thinking over the years quite a lot, is I'm not sure that most people actually, in this community, we come here, and the same colleagues that go to COP or go to, other relevant events, and we all have that understanding and we share that understanding, but do most people actually have the understanding?
How global
the food systems are not serving them, that they are not serving us? Do they see the linkages with their health, even just in terms of pure climate change, and they're all, there's linkages with all of this. But even if we didn't have a climate problem, and we were just looking at food systems and health, do actually people understand that the way we are producing and consuming, that our food systems are not serving us? Do most people understand what Marco was talking about? Or the second speaker, that what are we losing if we are losing all of this biodiversity? I mean, if I ask all of you, if we take a poll now, do we believe that most people know what are the impacts and consequences of losing 60% of biodiversity in the last 60 years? I don't think they are. So
I'd quite like to take the poll.
think-
Who thinks that people understand the links between their global food systems, health and well-being well enough in a way that's sophisticated? Hands up if you believe they do. Okay, interesting. Andre, as the standalone, who believes that they don't? Okay, so there's quite a sway and they don't. So actually, that's not a knowledge deficit problem. We know that there is a group of us that understand the links. There's an awareness deficit problem, which is that it's not.
But we are not able to reach those people. We are not able to have the message come across. And I'm not even sure that many of the decision makers, both on the private sector side and public sector side, actually know enough to trigger them to act with the sense of urgency that we need. Because there's this disconnect as well, which, you know, I know economists and psychologists try to explain is, you know, if we really understand what are the consequences of not reaching 1.5 to us and to our children and grandchildren, why are we not acting in consonance with that? What is this dissonance that we have? But I mean, there are explanations for this, and we see them written in textbooks, but what do we do about it?
Fascinating, thank you. So I know we're going to come to the later a little bit to kind of decision useful data and how do or decision useful knowledge, not data, decision useful knowledge and how do we make sure that people have the information that they need in order to act, but also understand the urgency with which they need to act. So we've covered private finance and public finance, or we've introduced the ideas of public finance and private finance. I'd like to come to Leslie Johnston to think about the role that philanthropy can play in this. Leslie, you're the founding CEO of Laudes Foundation, which is a philanthropy, Swiss-based philanthropy focused on accelerating systems transformation in industry, but also on influencing finance and capital markets to benefit to avoid the climate and nature crisis. From what you've heard, what do you think might be a role that philanthropy could play in rising to some of the challenges that our contributors so far have brought to?
Right. Thank you. It's great to be here. I'm also going to go here so I don't have my back to folks. So I love how I was grouped with the investors. So thank you. It makes me feel really good because I actually think that philanthropy is really around changing mindsets. And I think, Mafalda, the issue you just raised is an issue around narrative and knowledge and having that kind of individual impetus to change the way that we act. And that's where philanthropy, I think, plays a really important role. So I will answer your question, but I think maybe just preface it with, I think we're missing a trick on what philanthropy can do and the power of philanthropy. I just came back from COP, as many of you probably did, and I was shocked by the number of discussions around philanthropy's de-risking ability. And philanthropy can de-risk, but let's be honest, it's 800 billion a year maximum, and 2% of that is going toward climate action. It's nothing. I mean, less than 1 trillion is going out the door in philanthropy. We need 4 to 5 trillions for a just transition. So it's not going to be the silver bullet, but there is continued talk about it being the silver bullet. But what it can do is get us out of this optimization. I heard incrementalism. We're stuck in this short-termist mindset of projects and little things and points of light where we're basically optimizing the system. We're not transforming the system. And I think that's where philanthropy can play a role. I was very lucky to work closely with Bill McDonnell. And what I love about working with artists and designers and architects is that they push us to think differently about things. And he always used to quote Leibniz, the polymath from several centuries ago, where he said, if it exists, it's possible, so make it exist. And for me, that's where philanthropy can play a role. Philanthropy can help us reimagine the world. That's why I loved your report, because your report was saying, you know what, we are working toward this 1.5 degrees. Let's think differently about central banks. I mean, central banks might save us from ourselves, you know, but to do that, they probably need to ditch some of their independence and start taking a stand, as you said in your report. So what I love about philanthropy is it can play that role, but a couple things need to happen. First, we as philanthropy organizations need to work better together. There are 14,000 foundations in Switzerland. There is so much fragmentation in this industry. There's over 100 donor coalitions, and they're not talking to each other. And I would even argue to say that these donor coalitions aren't really doing the hard work. And I'm looking at Kirsten, because I know you've been pushing hard on a collaborative model, and it's been hard to get funders to step up and actually write a check. So we need to work better together. But we also need to, sorry, I'm very tired, so I had to write this down. We need to focus on creating those frameworks, but more importantly, those rules with teeth. I think this sort of culture of short-termism, incrementalism means we're not going to do this ourselves. We are not voluntarily going to make those hard decisions. So we need rules with teeth. And we're seeing that already coming from the EU. There's great legislation that's raising the floor on what's required of business and finance, but we need more. And thirdly, we need to work with unlikely allies. I mentioned central banks. A lot of our partners at Loudis are trying to put together the evidence to make central banks work differently. And that's a long slog, which requires a long timeline and one that we probably don't have a lot of time for. And then maybe finally, where philanthropy can play a role and should play a role, is it should continue to nurture and foster this human ingenuity and this creativity that we need to get us out of this mess. Because what got us here will not get us to where we need to go. We need to think differently. That means questioning some assumptions we have. For example, we do a lot of work in the built environment. What if we got out of this ownership model, you build something, you own a building, to a use model? What if we had collective ownership of things? I know I probably sound a little bit communist, but there's great models out there like community land trusts that are working. So let's actually question, individual first in favor of the common good. Let's question these assumptions that have actually governed how we operate, how we think even, and embrace a different way of thinking. And that's where I think philanthropy can help us, think differently.
Amazing, thank you. Just a couple of reflections. So I should know this data point, but I can't remember it. But of that 800 billion globally available from philanthropic foundations, a huge proportion is focused on health. So Mafalda, if we can make the link between health, well-being, and nature, then the philanthropic community can move. But that's also a capacity building piece for the philanthropic community, because the people who've historically given to health need to understand where the intersection is with climate and nature and human well-being. And then the central bank policy alignment, which I find really interesting. I think, again, to Mafalda's point about there must be a few other places in a few other bits of market architecture or policy governance where there is something that can unlock a change, but which people don't currently understand is a change that they should unlock. They don't currently understand how the architecture is skewed against them. And perhaps if there was a better awareness of not the cause, not the rationale for change, not even the situation we're in, but the way in which the market architecture privileges that continued business as normal, then I think those are interesting things.
Just one thought on that, because I think that the narrative piece is really powerful, and it's a piece that maybe the more conservative philanthropy has been more effective than the more liberal philanthropy. And you think at kind of why are we in this mess that we're in? A lot of the work around the Chicago School and neoliberal capitalism, there is a lot of philanthropy behind that, pushing that. And I think it's time for new philanthropy to step up and actually start to push a narrative that actually values nature and people. But we're not there yet.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm just going to... Oh, my goodness. Thank you. My contributors have been incredibly disciplined, so we're on time. Well, we're 5 minutes late. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to enable you. I think main course is going to come out. Has main course come out? Did I just miss that? But I think the main course is going to come out. I'd like you to enjoy table discussions. I would like you to enjoy Purposeful. A place for people with purpose. I like to enjoy purposeful table discussions, so maybe don't talk about the football or the whatever, but maybe think about framing some of the things that you've heard into your discussion. And afterwards, if there's time, I would really like to I might cherry pick some people, or I might to invite 1 to 2 table insights if someone's prepared to kind of speak to the discussion that they had at their table, and then we'll move on with our second slate of contributors. But thank you very much for the moment. The main course, I've been asked by Stephanie, in the intent team to say, is 3D printed. And if you would like to see the 3D printer, that's not the size it's normally for the main course. We haven't printed them one at a time, as I understand it. But there is a 3D printer demonstrating one of the kind of disruptive food technology and innovations about how we might leverage ourselves away from a carbon-intensive agriculture. Thank you very much. Yeah. Hello. Oh, can we turn it up a tiny bit? Just a tiny bit. Thank you. And can I take that other microphone? Thank you. I realize some of you are still getting your main course, but I want to not squeeze the time towards the end of the session. So no such thing as a free lunch. I'm sure that gets said a lot. Alexandre, I have the... I'm going to pick... I've cherry-picked some people because, you know, that's the way things work. I've cherry-picked some people to respond to a couple of respond with a couple of table insights. Eric, I don't know what table you're at. Oh, Eric's here. So Eric, you're the chief economist with Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and I'd really like to hear what you think.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to this very stimulating lunch. So I just wanted to do two things. One was to make a lot of negative things have been said about incrementalism, and incrementalism, I think, certainly is not something that we want to push. But I want to say that incrementalism has brought us quite a lot under the Paris Agreement. So we would have been in a much worse place had it not been for the Paris Agreement. So things that were done under Paris Agreement, things like the methodology. So I come from a development bank. We have agreed methodology now for how to measure climate finance. Every single project goes through a Paris alignment assessment. You know, we are committed now to tripling our funding for climate. So that is good to know, because when we are trying to do what we are talking about here, getting real systemic change, we need also to use those organizations that can achieve incremental things. So we have just published a flagship on nature as infrastructure. The idea there is that it's about thinking about nature as our most important infrastructure for preserving life. And for an infrastructure bank, that changes almost everything. It allows us to really look at what is the full potential of nature and look at all. Of course, we talk about ecosystem services and so on, but I think we are just at the beginning of us understanding, and maybe today's lunch meal is part of that, understanding what nature can deliver. And that, I think, that way of thinking will be very important. We will launch a nature action plan this year. Part of that will be calling for what we call Montreal alignment, in the same spirit as Paris alignment, to force all the MDBs, multilateral development banks, to go through these procedures, looking at each project for its impact on nature and how we can use it. So incrementalism will not be enough, but incrementalism has to be part of the solution. We are very excited to build this in now to our DNA. We have an advantage because we are still a small institution. There's still a lot of empty space to fill. The challenge is really to get the whole community of multilateral development banks, international institutions, to get that change. And you know, we are, and I hate to say it, we are kind of rudderless without the kind of political pressure that a group like this can exert. And of course, we need to also work very closely with the UN system. So these kind of conversations are incredibly important for how we think about the future and how we can contribute to this systemic change that we need. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Eric. In briefing Marie-Laure, we spoke about the Davos hot potato, which is it's the private sector needs to do it. Oh, no, it's the policy sector needs to do it. And I think it's an important recognition for today, and Eric is recognizing that everyone needs to do it. And that requires us to think differently about what's in our portfolio and what's not in our portfolio. And again, that alignment between our professional endeavor and our personal lives. Guillaume, I'm going to come to you. He's trying to hide, I can see him. Guillaume, we've actually been doing a bit of work with you on how philanthropy, so to Leslie's point, how philanthropies can collaborate, but also how philanthropies can become mobilizing forces by looking at how they align their philanthropic endeavor and their investment endeavor.
No, I wasn't hiding, but I got a 3D steak stain on my trousers.
And now we all know about it, Guillaume.
This is on? I'm not sure this is working. Is this working? It's working. Yeah. So thank you for the question. I think, and I'm going to refer to what Leslie was saying, foundations, grant-making foundations who have capital have to rethink the way they're investing. And I think the challenge is to say that foundations are not high net worth individuals, they're not pension funds, they're not financial institutions or insurance companies. So how can we really leverage the specificities of foundations in the way we think of risk, the way we think of performance, the way we think of impact and direct impact, and really have a tailor-made investment approach. And that's a challenge in terms of governance. It's a challenge of maybe thinking out of the box and stepping outside of traditional financial systems and looking at investment as we are looking at philanthropy side by side with the same skill sets and not separating them.
Thank you. And last of table reflections, Vianne, I'm coming at you. So Vianne, you are the founder of Nature Alpha, but you're also the CSO of FNZ, and I'd like to talk to you. I'd like to hear some reflections from you on investor behavior change.
Sure, and Isobel, thank you for masterful moderating, and Simon, thanking you for giving me permission not to have to wake up earlier and go to bed later. Thank you. I've been working in asset management for the last 20 years, fell in love with nature on the way, and so now as part of a $1.5 trillion wealth technology platform that serves retail investors like us, but also the founder of a business that wanted to create nature metrics so that people could understand their impact on nature, selfishly for myself. It's been interesting to understand and hear the comments from around the room. So just brief reflections, bringing together some of the things that we've heard from the table and some of the things that we've heard around the room. So I would say that, first of all, Marco, your scale point is so important. How do we do this at scale? And how do we make it happen at scale? And what's so interesting is that, to Andre's point, the finance sector is one of the most unbelievably brilliant places for leverage. What other tipping point can we have that is so powerful, or could be so powerful, if we equip investors to understand what behaviors they could enact? To Marie-Laure's point, this understanding of how investors are starting to think about nature and the environment in their decision-making, as well as the other SDGs, hugely important. And credit here to NatureFinance for all of the work that they've done in setting the future stage for the ecosystem into which we move. Think Task Force for Nature-related Financial Disclosures, and all the work on Beyond 1.5 degrees C. We have to have those policy frameworks and frameworks into which we move. So what you are so brilliant at doing is creating the future into which we will all move in the next few years. And finally, awareness, this understanding that Mafalda raised. Awareness. If we can equip CEOs of companies through investor behavior, talk to them about the issues that are important. There are still very few shareholder resolutions and and engagements, but very, very much growing in the area of nature awareness, nature risk, biodiversity, and so on and so forth. But that is where the frameworks are so crucial. And then finally, in the area of philanthropy and how we mobilize it, so interesting, where is the data that investors need on nature? Actually, it's sitting in the NGOs in some part. And so what we have now is business models that we are also developing, where if we use the data, we give back to the NGOs. And companies that are using that data will continue to provide new revenue streams to NGOs that can grow into the future. Finally, one really important reflection from this table was the importance of what this all means to the individual, families, fishermen, when you're planting, when you're creating wind farms in the sea, you're disturbing the seabed, you're taking away livelihoods from fishing families. So this is a multifaceted discussion that we're all having. It's not just about scale, it's also about scale for us as individuals and what we are empowered to do. So thank you.
Super, thank you, Vian. So setting the stage perfectly for me, not that we prompted her at all. I'd like to return to our contributors. Sandrine Dixon-de Clèves is the co-president of Club of Rome. The Club of Rome is a network and thought leadership model trying to drive leading edge thinking in global challenges. The Club of Rome has done work on the planetary emergency, framed within critical tipping points in critical ecosystems. What do you think are the systems that we need to think about changing if we're going to move into a world from beyond 1.5? And what are the most important policy recommendations and aimed at which actors? Not policy recommendations, recommendations and actions aimed at which actors?
Thank you, Isobel. Hi, everyone. I think I've been brought here to bring you indigestion at the end of your lunch, so I apologize for that. I'm going to shake things up a bit. Those of you who know me know that that tends to be the way I roll. First of all, not only are we talking about 1.5, but actually we passed 2.0 in November, several days. So we are definitely at a tipping point. Number two, many of us were at God knows how many other events at COP, and we had similar conversations. So can we please stop having these very tame, lovely conversations and get a hell of a lot more strategic? And I'm going to talk about that in the sense that we still are not talking about systems change, and that is what our activist youth asked us to do. We're still talking about nature as if it's separate from climate, as if it's separate from democracy, as if it's separate from us. So that's my number one point. Let's optimize our systems and understand they're completely interrelated, and the feedback loops are intense. That was the main message of our planetary emergency plan, that actually you have three pillars. You need to join up the biodiversity nature pillar with the climate, predominantly the energy and mobility impacts, and you need then to link that to the human dimension. And we've kind of skirted around the issue of the human dimension. What does this mean in practice? And this is where we get very specific. Because as we sit here nicely eating our lunch, that is properly designed as a vegetarian lunch, we have carbon bombs that are in our banking system right now. We have the fact that most of our oil and gas companies are making 2.8 billion profits, windfall profits, per day. And the fact that most of our banks, who had promised that they would pull out of these companies, have not. So while we talk about nature solutions, and by the way, we also knew that this is the way for Dubai to kind of get away from thinking about fossil fuel phase out, which was the biggest problem and something that many of us discussed, nature solutions cannot be at the expense of actually tripling our investments in renewables, tripling our investments in energy efficiency, and making sure that then they are complementary. And let's just remember, in terms of those carbon bombs, that the dozen biggest oil companies are on track to spend $103 million a day for the rest of the decade exploiting new fields of oil and gas. Okay? So one of the things we need to do is call them out. So this is my number one point of calling bullshit. Okay? The first point in terms of calling bullshit is the number of G20 and G8 pledges that we've had to eliminate fossil fuel subsidies. which we have still not done. So, number 2 point, please, can we call bullshit on that? And I mean this truly, because we sit here and we talk about everything else, but then the rest keeps on happening. And those are the emissions that are creating the most damage. Number 3, sorry, in terms of calling bullshit. Shift our international financial architecture to enable us to start also shifting away from pure shareholder value and also debt issues that we have today. We know that debt cancellation is fundamental, and the only way that the southern countries will actually be able to start to invest in the just transition is if we enable them to cancel their debt. Very important point, however. Let's remind ourselves that BlackRock owns 50% of the African debt. So we need to call BlackRock out. We need to call other investment companies out, because when the Macron summit has as the lead of its debt cancellation group BlackRock, you know you've got a problem. What happens in terms of the recommendations coming up on debt cancellation from the Macron summit? Nothing. That is the reality check. That is another calling bullshit point. We need to get real, people. So here now, as we've moved into the energy sphere, is the next point, which is inequality, which is we've heard that we need to have new narratives. Part of the new narrative is calling out the fact that when we have energy poverty growing across Europe, we also have windfall profits that are growing across Europe. Our oil and gas companies are making profits on the back of people. So what do? We need to tax those windfall profits. We need to tax 10% of the wealthiest, and that will be the message of my FT op-ed tomorrow. Because having proper distribution of wealth is the first premise of starting to actually get people to join this incredible narrative so that they feel empowered, that they can be part of the shift that we want to see. Because for the moment, all they're saying is, they're calling bullshit on us. You, the people that want us to actually adopt a clean energy agenda. You, the people that want us to be green, are by the same token enabling the leadership to continue to enable the wealthiest to make the profits on our backs. We will never bring people on this journey unless we actually start to untangle this web of inequality. And that means, can I keep on going?
Yeah, you
Okay.
can. I mean, I don't quite know how I stop you, Sandrine, but...
No, but you have the right to stop me, because sometimes I do ramble. I get a little too excited. Okay, I have another minute. So we need to think about energy justice, people. We need to think about food justice. We need to think about how we can actually create this. What we're trying to do in working also with the European Union is how can we put in place a Grand Marshall Plan that has a narrative where Europe is united in front of the greatest European elections, most important we will ever have. We know that we are moving towards the right in many of those elections. We know that we could potentially have European institutions that will be determined by a right-wing leadership. This is fundamental. How do you make sure that people vote in the right way? One way is to start issuing a EU check, making sure that that EU check for every single citizen takes into consideration the narrative that their energy prices have gone up, that inflation has gone up, that united, we will actually start to ensure that every single citizen can be part of this green and social journey, and we will show it through just transition funds at the national level and EU institutions that are caring about our citizens. Then you've got some people that might be a bit more interested in our agenda. You might actually think that these people might start to say, hey, they're taking care of me. And they're actually starting to tax the bad guys. And they really do understand what my needs are. That's number one. But linked to the justice portfolio is the democracy portfolio. How do we ensure that we vote a leadership that will enable us to continue to have the freedom to also build the European Green Deal agenda? Because I can tell you right now that, again, here at the European level, in conversations with President von der Leyen and her team, she is incredibly worried. Incredibly worried. And we as a community need to make sure that she has all the tools in her toolbox and are enabling her at the member state level so that not only can she be re-elected as president, because we need her, it's her legacy, but also that she feels comfortable in that election, that she has a community that's giving her the tools to bring the narrative to people and to enable us to then implement the European Green Deal. I'm almost finished. Yep, I absolutely promise. The last point is governance. For those of us that were at COP, and for those of you who know my letter with many others that we developed with Johan Rockström, we must have a new climate and biodiversity COP governance framework. This means that not only do we need to link the biodiversity and the climate COPs together, we need to put pressure in terms of systemic thinking on our leadership so they understand the feedback loops. We also need to understand where the different articles are actually linked and start to integrate a linked-up approach and a systems approach between the two COPs. But most importantly, we cannot continue to accept, all of us who go to these COPs, for the continuous trade show that we see, and the same here at Davos, by the way, where we all sit here complacently talking to each other, but realizing that, as I indicated at the beginning, carbon bombs continue. The main decisions are still not taken. We did not get what we wanted at COP27 in terms of a fossil fuel phase out, and so no more trade shows. Let's call upon our negotiators to come together more often during the year to ensure that they actually make the decisions that they need to make. That doesn't mean that non-state actors shouldn't be engaging with state actors. We all need to be part of that process, but in a very different way. So that the next COP, even though it's in Azerbaijan, which already gives us a very bad signal, is actually a COP that builds until Brazil. And the Brazilian COP, and I've spoken to the leadership, will not have the same circus that we've seen up until now. And we need to hold the UN accountable to make sure that that becomes a COP for decision-making and not another circus, including this Davos week. Please, when you leave this room, shake things up so I'm not the only one who has to be the provocative one. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandrine. So maybe you're here to make sure that everyone doesn't fall asleep because they've eaten 3D printed vegan steak. So there's a couple of interesting points of the idea about value capture, going back to value capture, who's getting the money and where is it stopping in the system? So the question about there are still record profits being made in sectors that we have pledged to phase out. But also for me, there's a storytelling piece which goes to your democracy point, which is that at a point in the UK, and I'm sure elsewhere, the story of energy security became co-opted by energy companies as we are looking after people as part of a just transition. It's necessary that we remain, and that was to kind of cover over an absolute failure of policy and political leadership where we should have invested in renewable infrastructure in the UK a long time before, and we had done nothing about insulating people's houses or offering them dignity. So we're kind of, we get caught out by the kind of bad faith actors that we've spoken about stepping into a space that's been left by a vacuum of policy and governance. Naoko. That's an act to follow, isn't it? So you are the director of the Global Commons Alliance, which mobilizes stewardship of the global commons. You and I have spoken about this kind of how do you translate systems change down the value chain to understand how you ensure a just transition. And we spoke about following on from the carbon profits. We've seen record profits in the food sector. As a result of conflict and disrupted global supply chains. In a beyond 1.5 world, many geographies will not be able to grow the crops and commodities they have historically. How do we ensure that the people at the bottom of the supply chain and the decision makers have the knowledge and the action that they need in order to make sure that they can adapt? I think that one's working. If it's not, I'll give you this one.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me, but next time don't put me just behind Sandrine. It's exceedingly difficult to follow. Anyway, so good to be here, and I think we all enjoy at COP28 a bit of victory of the nature community, followed by COP15, the global goal for nature. But I don't think that we should be enjoying this small victory of the nature community here and there, because we all know that things do not add up to the system change. So that the science and data are exceedingly clear that we need to really think about the future, that beyond 1.5, and what does it really mean to some of the sector which are totally depending on nature. And as you pointed out, actually the agriculture, the food system is definitely one of those sectors. And as we all know, 600 million smallholder farmers producing almost 1/3 of the food supplying for the world. And then here is and as I think Mafelda mentioned that this food system really doesn't serve us that from health point of view, the nature point of view. But then what are we promoting? In the community, regenerative agriculture is kind of very popular, and this is considered to be a solution for nature and the health. But when we think about what kind of world we are seeing beyond 1.5, can we continue to promote this kind of regenerative agriculture if there is no soil, no water, no ecosystem? And I'm actually thinking that are we putting a lot of risk that this 600 million people at huge risk in terms of their livelihood and their sustainable that life? So that what are we really trying to do, or what to do? So that is a question posed by this report, planning for a future beyond 1.5. So I want to say maybe 3 things, how we should be doing things differently. Number 1, we really need to understand what's coming, so that because those assumptions may be changing, and that the AI and the technology really help us to understand what would be in the future, say 10 years from now, 20 years now, and we need to be really serious about understanding, comprehending those predictions. But the second thing that following on the first one, then we really need to think that the planning, the strategy very, very differently based on that, because assumption is now changing. So what does it mean to the agriculture? We were talking about what kind of crops and when and where and how, so that that kind of thing cannot really wait forever. So the urgent action for planning, not just project by project, it's really more country by country and maybe region by region or globally, is exceedingly difficult, important. That's the second point. But the third point, I really feel very passionate and personally, is how does it mean to finance? That we are here for talking about nature finance. And that's already become very clear from this table, from this the room, the current financial system doesn't really do good for us. It really doesn't change that system. It's a part of the existing system. How can we really change the financial system so that it can really serve for us? As already pointed out, many speakers ahead of me, that the financial system continue to finance this heavy emission growth, the oil industry growth, so that so while doing that, how can we expect this financial system to also fund or invest in nature? The fact how we can really change that the financial system. And one proposal I would make is that if we really go to the bottom of the problem for system change, we have to think about, which is already mentioned by Andre, by the way, at the very beginning, that how to put the price on nature, or how to really value the nature, not just worshipping, but to put the economic value of nature so that not just a company, but an international investors and the capital market can invest in nature as a new asset class on the balance sheet, either of the company or even country, if it just help that debt issue too. So how we can really change this fundamental of the financial system and the economic system, so that on this point, I and Simon Zadek have been discussing a long time, and we are not yet to fully agree on what's next. But my disruptive proposal is that we should really change that to challenge the current accounting system, so that the nature be monetary valued, so that it become a new asset class, and for not just a company, but for the international capital market. So with that, I hope that we kind of reward that the stewardship of the nature. We would penalize that the institutions, the companies who do destroy the nature. So these should really come together as a carbon pricing. Otherwise, we will never achieve nature positive together with carbon neutral. So that is my proposal, and I think that now we can continue to debate how we can really system change the current financial sector. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Naoka. I would say that it's a characteristic of nature finance that I value highly, that it's hard to agree with Simon. It's the debate that is fun, right? So we've gone from systems change, we're coming down to, well, not coming down, but we're focusing now on the importance of the individual and individual decision making, and how do you plan for a future. Chris, you are the leader of the Strategic Foresight Hub at ETH Zurich, and you're about to embark on a project looking at called Your 2040, which is looking at the lives of 6 Swiss citizens in 2040 in an at least 2-degree warmed world.
Yeah, exactly.
So 1.5 is gone, 2 degrees is coming at us. You know, the battleground has changed. How can the academic and the foresight community support individual citizens to plan for a future?
Thank you very much, and thank you everybody very much for being here. How many of you, before I get to that question, how many of you have read Ministry for the Future? So who has not read it? Okay, you have a piece of homework on day 1 of WEF. When Stan wrote that book, the idea that India would experience an event which would kill hundreds of thousands of individuals was simply science fiction. They didn't have the new colors on the map of the dark, 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 dark reds that now exist. So it was unfathomable as a science fiction writer that this would become real. In many ways, for me, when I read this paper that Simon shared with us, I thought this is also one of those moments where we have to wake up and actually think about not just the what's, the so what's, but the now what's. Now what do we do? And not just what do we do to turn that W over so it actually turns into an M. Instead of we, me. What do I do? Where do I influence those who I can influence? What can I actually really do to make change happen? And as Andre said at the very beginning, what are the real actions we can take? I can only do what I can do. I can't just talk in rhetoric, but I can actually try to do what I can do, which is this program, which is Your 2040. We're trying to take a look at 6 citizens' lives today in the Engadine, which is another valley up here. It's also as pretty as this one. Maybe a little bit more pretty. I don't know. We could argue about that. In a town called Bever, Le Pont, working with schools there in the university and Cour, and saying, what does a day in the life of 6 citizens look like today? What will it look like in 2040, given what science is telling us? Not putting rosy glasses on. Switzerland's already experiencing 4.2 degrees Celsius change, with 5 degrees when the glaciers are almost all gone, when these high mountain valleys can actually have crop seasons instead of ski seasons. What will that life look like 2040, 2050? What will you buy in the store? How will you do it? When Spain no longer exports water in the form of a tomato or a cucumber, what will we eat and how will we do it? So we're trying to take a look at that. Again, it's like looking at what science is telling us. And just the way Marco said, you cannot hide behind the finger. I love that. I'm going to use that. I want to learn it in Italian because I think it... Yeah, you can have the copyright. I'll give you credit all the time. But I think that's really quite wonderful because I remember my grandmother, like you probably said, no, you can't hide behind the finger. None of us can. I can't. And also the global goals for nature, really fantastic. How do we integrate those into this mandate with 2040 with full decarbonization? What does it actually look like? How many of you know what your life is like on a daily basis if your town was fully decarbonized? Can you say you know what that looks like? I would argue nobody does. And how can we argue for a path if we don't know what the path begins to look like? And that's for me. Marie-Laure, I'm not quite sure how you say it, the unknown is here. And I agree with that. And it scares me. I have 2 kids in their 20s. I look at loss, they look at a new context. My son, when I went to the Rhone Glacier to show him the beginning of the Rhone and where the glacier was, way over here at the beginning of the Hanging Valley, and where it's way over here now, he just looked at me and said, yeah, Papa, that's a story. I can see the glacier there. I can't see it there. And so for he said, yeah, we're going to do it. Just help us. And that was for me also what we're trying to do with this, is to help the 20-year-olds understand where it can go. I liked also where you said the price is not right. That gave me a piece of homework to understand that a little bit more. I'm not an economist, I'm a futurist, so I've never made much money, so where you go. Hey, I'm not a good one at that. But can I take a few more? Mafalda said, the knowing-doing gap remains somewhat impenetrable. Maybe you didn't mean it exactly this way, but the knowing where we are today, the doing to get to that future is in many ways impenetrable. How can we make that less impenetrable? Taking the lessons that we can learn from this incredible brain trust, which you've heard here already and is in the room, in our circles, which you already have. How do we learn about the actions which we can and must be taking? And I like, Leslie, how you were saying philanthropy as a means to transformation and can help us think differently about what can and will happen. Right? I think I really like that, releasing us from the venture capitalist focus of getting a return to actually helping us to look at those steps out to 2040 to where that can really be. And Sandine, I'm glad I didn't follow you either. That was really, truly inspirational, and I mean that sincerely. I would love to almost hear you like on a daily basis to remind me to keep fighting the fight. No, I really, because one of the things that I think is really important with the 2040 community is also getting inspiration to keep fighting the fight. That gets tiring sometimes. I'm only a 4 days a week optimist. 3 days a week, it's pretty dark. No, not all, but it really. This is facing the reality, but 4 days a week, I'm still on the other side. I think this is why this community and many of you in here help me. And Naoko, the assumptions are changing. This is so true. And thank you for sharing that. And to put a price on nature, to me, nature is priceless. And yet, our systems require that we put that price on there. So good luck with that, and thank you.
Can I push you before you stop?
Yeah, you can.
Can I push you on?
Sure.
The academic community
Yep.
responds differently in an emergency
Yep.
than in peace. What do you think? I don't want to frame this as a war effort.
No.
But like if we are in an emergency, how can the academic community meet the challenge differently, and what would need to change?
Yeah, so great question. To me, there's 3 things that come up immediately. Someone said the difference between our professional and our personal lives. Now, I was talking to someone not too long, like last week, an academic, and they were saying, well, I do German literature, so I can't really do much for the climate activity. But I said, what about in your private life? And so you have to think that in our academic communities, there's so many different layers that we can be engaging and encouraging. I think most academics are on this bandwagon already. And if you're involved in any community where you are, your schools, your universities, make sure that you're engaging with them to see what their path to zero is. You know, in Switzerland, we're required to from the federal level, and so we're on our way. We have a pathway. The second is help give them light, give them time, give them space to enter into your circle. That would be a second one, to reach out with your own world where you are, to try to find out who are those leading lights that you would like to also listen to. Also, maybe you don't want to listen to, but invite them in as well, because this is really important. Then for me, the third is help try to fund some of the research, which is leading towards a solution space. And like when I think of this, and the entire, not just this people, but beyond 1.5, we don't know what that's going to look like. So we need to truly close that knowledge gap. And I think that's what we can be doing in the academic world.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
So Simon, I'm not going to steal your lines. You get the whole summing up on what you've heard. And then I would just like to say quickly, thank you so much all for being here. Thank you for those who've joined us online. Thank you to Intent for hosting us, just in case you forget to do the thing at the end.
So not that I would forget, but thank you, Isobel, very much. Yeah, so lower your expectations, folks. But luckily, you know, Sandrine's contribution, Chris's contribution, and actually all 10 contributions were like sort of micro summaries of the story in a box. Yeah, it looks different if you're Mafalda sitting in a deeply conservative institutional context with a heap of cash and really trying to figure out how to be able to do something smart given the world that we're moving into. Or if we're sitting, Leslie, in the Loudest Foundation, yeah, absolutely. How do we avoid, in a sense, or step away from kind of the optimization agenda, which we're all inclined to do, and yet, to Eric Bergloff's point from AIB, you know, we shouldn't walk away from what systematizing change at a lower level in the system also means and involves and delivers to us and allows us to get up in the morning and get on a train without it crashing into some mountain. So we've got to figure this story, and each of you have a different piece. Chris mentioned Ministry of the Future. I think we shouldn't overweight the document, but last week NatureFinance had an offsite of its team, and we sort of did just a cheeky lineup of people who felt that an insider play might work, and people who felt that an outsider play might work, all the way out to eco-terrorism. And for those who've read Ministry of the Future, that's the children of Kali bit of the story. Yeah, it was interesting. You know, lots of people all the way along that line, but a growing number that sort of assumed that we would move into a sort of violent scenario. And already we see parts of that beginning to emerge. Yeah, and the question is, where do we sit in that ecosystem? I'm not inviting you, since we're taping and live streaming, to join that community. You know, but you know, as I remember Kumi Naidu, previously the Secretary General of Amnesty International, asking Al Gore in public, you know, are you willing to go to jail? You know, kind of how far are you really willing to go? Yeah, and I think that's a question that many of us may face at all sorts of different levels. Maybe are we willing to really piss off our professional community? Are we willing to risk our career? Are we willing to step out in a whole series of ways that map against, as Sandrine said, kind of what we know? What we know. You know, last year, the 5 largest tech companies in the US increased their asset value by $3.9 trillion. That can't be right. That just can't be right. And there are so many of those headlines. You gave a few, Sandrine, but there are many, many, many others that we could touch on that we kind of know it's just bust. Yeah, and the question is whether we can both use our professional capabilities, the institutions that we're in, the experience we have, and yet step out of the ways in which we have been working and look differently at what's possible. We all get out of bed optimistic, otherwise we don't get out of bed. That's what presumably brings you to the Magic Mountain. And so I'd like to think that we can do that, but we can't do it if this is just a good lunchtime conversation. That doesn't cut it. Yeah, that it does require that we leave the room, not surprisingly, you'd expect me to say it, with that kind of question in every session you go to in the Magic Mountain, but also on your way home, in the discussions with your children and partners and so on and so forth. Kind of how do we change that picture beyond kind of what we've been doing so far? So with that, many thanks to those who have made sort of active stand-up contributions. Many thanks to those who have listened to things, some of which they would agree with, perhaps some of which they wouldn't agree with so much. And I wish you well for the rest of the Davos experience. Thanks very much indeed.
Simon, I did a terrible mistake when I said something before. I forgot to thank NatureFinance for their contribution to this book. This is for you. And thank you to NatureFinance for all it does, and of course for this lunch as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.